Hi, my name is Maya Carter, 27 years old, and I never thought my own sister would stab me in the heart at my graduation dinner. It was supposed to be a night of celebration in my parents' home in Boston, Massachusetts, the night I finally held my MBA degree from New York University, the night I thought my family would finally look at me with pride. I'd even brought a special cake, layered with cream and decorated with red roses, a small tribute to mark the milestone I had worked so hard for. The dining room buzzed with chatter, neighbors, relatives, friends, the clinking of wine glasses, and the hum of conversation filling the air. I was setting the cake at the center of the table, smiling through the exhaustion, when everything collapsed. My sister Olivia, 5 years younger, leaned back in her chair, her voice slicing through the laughter like a knife. "You're a burden. We want to live without you." The words landed like a punch. My father, sitting at the head of the table, simply smiled and sipped his wine. My mother froze with her fork suspended in the air. Every guest went silent, their eyes darting nervously. No one said a word. Not Dad, not Mom, not a single friend. The room suffocated me with its silence. I picked up my glass, swallowed the bitter taste, set it down, and stood up. Calm. Deliberate. Every step measured. They didn't deserve my tears. I walked to my old bedroom, packed a suitcase, my laptop, a few clothes, and slipped out the back door into the cold Boston night. My car engine roared softly as I drove away. I didn't look back. From that moment, I swore I would never go back to being the silent wallet, the invisible caretaker, the burden they claimed I was. But what about them? When the lights go out, the water stops running, and the bills start piling up, will they still think it's so easy to live without me? What time is it where you are? And which city are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I want to see how far this story is reaching, and who out there understands what it means to carry everything and be called nothing. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell, because in the next part, I'll show you exactly what happened when I started cutting off every single bill. Let's talk about boundaries, the real kind. Boston at night was cold and silent. Rows of old streets slid past the car window, neon lights from diners and gas stations stretching into long streaks of color. I drove without direction, not knowing where I would end up, only certain that I could not turn back. After nearly 10 miles, I stopped in front of a small roadside motel along the highway. Its worn-out sign flickered faintly, the single-story rooms lined up with dimly lit windows. I stepped into the front desk, booked a room with my credit card. The night manager barely glanced at me before handing over the key, hardly paying attention. I pulled my suitcase into room number 14, the door closing behind me. Lying in that motel room under the weak yellow glow of the lamp, I turned my face to the wall, letting the hum of the old air conditioner drone on like a sad refrain. Sleep came and went, leaving me with overlapping fragments of memory pulling me back into years I thought I had buried. The image of the little cafe, bookstore in New York surfaced so vividly I could almost smell the roasted coffee beans and feel the fine layer of dust clinging to the old books on the wooden shelves. The cafe wasn't large, just enough space for a few rows of tables, a quiet reading corner, and the faded silver espresso machine I had bought from a thrift store. But that place was my world. I had spent years saving from part-time jobs and scholarships to finally open Leaf and Lottie, where students, book lovers, and young couples often came to find peace amid the chaos of the city. I remembered every morning when I unlocked the door, sunlight streaming through the glass, falling on the long table where regulars sat typing on their laptops. I remembered the laughter of customers who had become friends, and the late nights I stayed behind, balancing the books, wiping down tables, exhausted but happy. The cafe was my brainchild, my pride, proof that I could build a life of my own from nothing. Then an unexpected call from Boston changed everything. It was a late autumn evening. I had just finished my shift and was closing the cafe when my phone buzzed. My father's voice was heavy, stripped of the ease he usually carried. The house was drowning in debt. My mother's medical bills after an emergency surgery had spiraled beyond their ability to pay. On top of that, there was the looming bank mortgage and a roof so rotted it needed urgent repair. I could hear my mother coughing in the background, the weary sighs of my father, and even Olivia's silence. She was still in college then, unable to do anything but stand by. I sat motionless in the darkened cafe, those words sinking into me, my chest tightening with every detail. Memories of my childhood, the red brick house, the garden where I used to play, came flooding back alongside a crushing sense of responsibility. I didn't hesitate. Within a week, I decided to sell the cafe, handing everything over to a trusted friend in the business. The $200,000 I received was not much compared to the years I had poured into it, but I didn't dwell on that. All I thought about was saving my family, about the relief on my mother's face when she no longer had to worry about hospital bills, about the grateful nod from my father when the bank stopped sending collection notices. I wired the money, cleared every debt, hired workers to repair the roof, and kept aside a small amount for property taxes. Then I packed up my things, left New York, and returned to the old room in the house I had once left behind to chase my dream. I told myself it was only temporary, just a few months, until things steadied again. But that temporary stay didn't last a few months, it stretched into 3 full years. From the moment I returned, every bill found its way to me. Electricity, water, internet, home insurance, property taxes, even the smallest services like trash collection and cable television. All of it was automatically deducted straight from my account. The total added up to $2,500 each month, as precise and steady as the ticking of a clock. I started searching for a more stable job to keep the cash flow going, forcing myself to walk away from my passion for coffee and books. I joined an import-export company, then later took a management role at a supermarket chain just to maintain income. None of these jobs ever gave me the same spark as running Leaf and Latte, but I convinced myself it was the price of keeping the family safe. At first, my parents seemed grateful. My father would occasionally pat my shoulder and mutter a thank you before settling back down to watch baseball. My mother hugged me and said I was the backbone of the house. I didn't blame Olivia, she was still young, fresh out of college, stumbling through the job hunt. But over time, gratitude turned into expectation. My father began to treat my paying the bills as something natural, my mother stopped asking whether I was struggling, and Olivia started mumbling that I was taking up space in the house she believed belonged to them. They slowly forgot that without me, the bank would have taken this home long ago, that the meals under this roof only existed because I scraped every dollar out of my own paycheck. Day by day, I felt less like a member of the family and more like an invisible wallet. I remembered the evenings when I came home after long hours at work, carrying takeout for everyone, only to be met with half-hearted nods before they all retreated to their own screens. I remembered the nights I juggled company financial reports while double-checking my own bank account, making sure the electric bill would be paid automatically the next morning. And I remembered the long, heavy silence whenever Olivia began hinting that I was merely staying for free in the house, even though I was the only one keeping it from collapsing. 3 years passed like that, and I became a shadow in my own family. They grew used to the money I carried on my back in silence, used to enjoying light, running water, and a steady internet connection without ever once wondering where it came from. I shrank further and further into myself, losing my joy, losing even the sense of who I was. Until that night of graduation, when Olivia stood up and voiced what perhaps they had all been thinking, I finally saw it clearly. To them, I was no longer Maya, the daughter who once dreamed, who once sacrificed, who had done everything for her family. To them, I was nothing but a burden, even though I was the one carrying the weight of the entire house. And that was the moment I decided to let go. During those nights at the motel, I often thought of Olivia, the little sister who once followed me like a shadow. When I was 10, she was just 5, always running behind me with her 2 braids bouncing as she moved. She loved rummaging through my books, skipping around my room just to earn the chance to doodle clumsy flowers in my notebook. I could still remember vividly that summer night when we spread a blanket in the backyard, lying on our backs, staring at the sky. Olivia asked me, with childlike innocence, what kind of shop I would open when I grew up, and what her role would be there. I laughed and said I would have a cafe, bookstore, and she would be my little assistant, helping to arrange comic books. Her eyes sparkled then, so bright it seemed they could swallow the stars. I truly believed there was a bond between us that could never break. But after I sold my cafe and returned home, everything changed. At first, Olivia was cheerful, calling me her amazing sister, and proudly telling her friends I had given up my career to help our parents. But soon those words of praise faded, replaced by irritated glances whenever I stepped into the kitchen. She developed a habit of sighing, muttering sharp little comments like needles. When I washed the dishes, she would say, "You should be grateful you're even allowed to stay in this house." When I forgot to put a cup back in its exact place, she snapped. "So annoying, you never know how to fit in." I forced a strained smile, telling myself she was just stressed, still adjusting to the pressures of work after graduation. But that stress never passed. It hardened into habit and eventually became her constant attitude. With each passing day, Olivia made a deliberate effort to prove that I didn't belong. She stuck little notes on the refrigerator. "Remember to pay the gas bill. Don't forget the internet fee. Clean up the living room." Reading those words choked me because I was the one paying every single bill. She knew exactly which account the money was deducted from each month, yet she still wrote them as if reminding a freeloader of their duties. Once, when her friends came over, I overheard her whisper, "She doesn't do anything, just sits around here." I stood in my room, hearing every word stab straight into my ears, but I chose silence. I didn't want to start a war in the very house I was carrying on my shoulders. What hurt the most wasn't the snide remarks, but my parents' silence. I once hoped that when they saw Olivia's attitude, my father would step in, or my mother would defend me. But they didn't. My father just sat in the garage tinkering with broken lawnmowers from the neighbors, pretending not to hear. My mother busied herself with the gardening club, chatting with Mrs. Diane next door about roses, as if the tension inside our house had nothing to do with her. The harder I tried to fit in, the more invisible I became. One evening at dinner, Olivia suddenly raised her voice. "Honestly, if you didn't live here, things would be so much easier." My throat tightened as I turned to my mother, but she just quietly spooned soup into her bowl. I looked at my father, and he sipped his beer without a word. Not one of them challenged what she had said. I felt cast out of my own family right there at the table, yet I had to keep eating, swallowing spoonfuls of rice mixed with tears. From then on, I began to retreat. I left the house early, before anyone else was awake, heading to cafes in downtown Boston to work remotely, just to avoid Olivia's constant barbs. I often walked along the Charles River until sunset before returning home, so I wouldn't have to face those cold stares. In my old bedroom, I ate dinner alone, listening to Olivia laughing with her friends in the living room. Every time a bill arrived, I quietly paid it without a word, as if it were my unquestionable duty. Gradually, I no longer recognized the Olivia I once knew. The little shadow who used to follow me, who once admired me, was gone. In her place stood a young woman with eyes full of disdain and a tongue always ready to wound. I asked myself over and over if I had done something wrong, if I had taken something from her that made her feel threatened. But eventually, I realized her change came from becoming too accustomed to my sacrifices. When I carried every burden, she accepted it as her entitlement, and my very presence became an annoyance, a mirror reflecting her own helplessness back at her. As for my parents, their silence felt like betrayal. I understood they were tired, that age had made them long for peace, but that peace was built entirely on my shoulders. They allowed Olivia to spit her cruel words, hiding behind their quiet as if it were a shield. But that very silence pushed me further away, making it clear that no matter how much I carried, I would never be valued in that house. All of it built into a quiet fire inside me, waiting for the night of graduation to erupt, burning through the last fragile thread that tied me to them. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the worn curtains of the motel room, casting streaks of light across the stained wall, a reminder that even if I had hit rock bottom the night before, the sun still rose and life carried on. I sat up, my head heavy from restless sleep. On the table, my phone lit up with dozens of unread messages, all from my mother and Olivia. I didn't open them. I simply watched the screen buzz and go dark again. I knew if I read them, I'd be dragged back into that familiar cycle: blame, pleading, and reproach mixed together. I didn't want to hear it anymore. Instead, my thoughts went to a place, to someone, or rather, two people, the only ones I believed could offer me a measure of peace. Grace and Daniel Miller. Grace had been my friend since the early days of my cafe, bookstore in New York. We first met when she rushed into the shop, arms full of research papers, panic written all over her face as she searched for a quiet place to prepare for a presentation the next morning. I showed her a small corner by the window and brought her a cappuccino on the house. From that day on, she became a regular, then a friend. Her husband, Daniel, was the one who helped me repaint the wooden shelves one weekend, simply because he didn't want me to waste money hiring overpriced contractors. They were neither wealthy nor especially successful, but they were always genuine, always warm. When I made the decision to sell the cafe to save my family, Grace cried with me, and Daniel quietly placed a steady hand on my shoulder, telling me that one day I would have another cafe again. Now, sitting on the motel bed, I thought of them as a safe haven. I packed my suitcase, checked out, and drove straight to Brooklyn, where they lived in a small red brick house wrapped in cascading wisteria vines. When I pulled up to the curb, Daniel was already standing on the porch, as if he had recognized me from afar. His brow furrowed as he stepped quickly forward. "Maya, are you all right?" His voice was low, filled with concern. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled, tears threatening to spill. "Do you two have time? I need to talk." Grace opened the door and pulled me inside, her eyes following my every movement as if she could read all the words I couldn't bring myself to say. The kitchen table was already set with toast and coffee, the aroma filling the room and pulling me back to mornings at my own cafe. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly together to keep myself steady. Then, like a dam breaking, everything spilled out: the night of graduation, Olivia's cruel words, my father's indifferent smile, my mother's silence, the moment I packed my things and walked away. And all the years before that, when I sold my cafe, poured every dollar into saving my family, and then paid $2,500 each month for every bill. I told it all, not leaving out a single detail. When I finally stopped, the room grew heavy with silence. Grace rested her chin on her hand, her gaze distant, while Daniel shook his head softly and let out a long sigh. "Maya, you've sacrificed too much," Grace said, her voice trembling. "But the worst part is, they never once acknowledged it. They only grew used to your sacrifice, then treated it as if it were your duty." I gave a hollow laugh and said I was already used to it, but deep inside, her words cut into me like a knife reopening an old wound. Then Grace told me about a mutual friend of hers named Catherine. After her divorce, Catherine had moved back in with her family, bringing home her monthly paycheck, covering all the bills, supporting the household with her own hard work. But when she finally decided to leave and start over, her family turned on her, calling her selfish. Catherine was devastated, but in the end, she chose to cut off all support. Within just a few months, the family had to fend for themselves, only then realizing how much she had carried. "She told me something I never forgot," Grace continued. "That sometimes, love isn't about continuing to carry the burden, it's about stopping, so others can learn to stand on their own. If not, you'll drown in endless sacrifice." I sat in silence, every word pouring straight into my chest. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze, his voice steady and warm. "You've done more than any child could ever be expected to do. It's time you start living for yourself." My vision blurred, and for the first time in years, I cried without trying to hold it back. Not the tears of humiliation, but of being understood. I realized then that this might have been the first time someone truly saw me with respect, not as an invisible wallet, not as a burden, but as a human being who had given far too much. That night, I stayed at Grace and Daniel's home. We sat out on the porch, the streetlights casting a golden glow on the drooping wisteria blossoms. A soft breeze carried the damp scent of a Brooklyn night. For the first time in so long, I felt a strange but welcome peace, the kind I had forgotten. In that moment, I knew I had found my refuge not in a place called family, but in people who chose to stand by me not out of duty, not for gain, but out of genuine love. The next morning, I woke up in the small guest room at Grace and Daniel's house. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, falling across the wooden table where I had set down my suitcase. On the table sat a steaming cup of coffee Grace had brewed early, its gentle aroma filling the air. I sat down, took a sip, then opened my laptop. The familiar sound of it starting up made my heart race, as if signaling that today would be the day I truly let go. I was too used to logging into my bank account, only to check the balance after countless automatic payments had drained it. But this time, I wasn't logging in to watch money disappear. I was logging in to end it. The transaction page appeared, a long line of scheduled payments like a ledger of all the years I had silently turned myself into my family's wallet. Electricity, $350 a month. Water, $120. Internet, $100. Home insurance, $500. Property taxes, an enormous figure that consumed nearly all of my monthly income. And then there were the countless smaller charges. Trash collection fees, regular maintenance costs, the cable television subscription I never even used, the Netflix account Olivia watched every night, the music service my mother signed up for, even the garden club membership she had once insisted I cover. Looking at them all, I saw clearly the shape of the invisible chains that had bound me for the past 3 years. I moved the cursor to the cancel option on the electric bill. My finger froze for a second, my chest tight with hesitation. Then I clicked. The screen flashed. Confirm cancellation of recurring payment. I pressed, yes. A long breath escaped me, so deep that my shoulders slumped with relief. For the first time in my life, I felt as though I had just removed a heavy shackle. I went on to the water bill, the internet, the home insurance, the property taxes. With each cancellation, it was as if another door opened in my mind, a horizon growing brighter and wider. Daniel sat at the dining table, quietly watching me. He didn't say a word, just nodded gently every time I erased another payment. Grace placed her hand on my shoulder, her warmth steadying me. "You're doing the right thing, Maya," she whispered. I wasn't angry anymore, nor humiliated. What I felt now was the clarity of freedom. I realized that for years, I had lived inside a cage built of money, one I had constructed myself in the hope of keeping my family safe. But a cage is still a cage, no matter how lovingly you paint it. When I canceled the home insurance payment, images rose unbidden in my mind. My father in the garage, tinkering with broken lawnmowers, pretending not to hear the arguments. My mother on the porch, smiling with the neighbors about her roses while inside, Olivia tore into me. And then Olivia herself, that smug look on her face as she declared I was a burden. It all became painfully clear they had grown so used to living off me that they had forgotten my true worth. If I kept going, they would never learn how to stand on their own, and they would never see me as anything more than a source of money. Finally, I canceled the property tax payment. The screen went blank, no more scheduled charges waiting to drain me. I sat there motionless, my hands still resting on the mouse, but inside me was a vast calm. I had expected to tremble, to feel guilty, but I didn't. Instead, there was a weightless freedom, as if I had just stripped off a suit of rusted armor I had been wearing for far too long. I closed my eyes, drew in a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. "Do you feel lighter now?" Grace asked softly. I opened my eyes, looked at her, and nodded. For the first time, I don't feel bound anymore. I feel free. Daniel let out a quiet laugh, folded his newspaper, and said, "You've given them more chances than anyone could. Now it's their turn to manage. And it's your time to start living for yourself." I smiled a real smile, the first in months. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew my family would react harshly, that there would be calls, blame, begging. But now, I was different. I was no longer a wallet, no longer a shadow to be exploited. I was Maya Carter, and for the first time in years, I truly belonged to myself. Just as I had predicted, less than 24 hours after the payments were canceled, my phone began to buzz relentlessly. The screen lit up with the name I knew would appear first. Olivia. I let it ring, let the urgent chime stretch out, then fade away. But less than a minute later, it lit up again. This time, I answered not because I wanted to hear, but because I wanted to face it. Maya, what the hell did you do? Olivia's voice shrieked through the line, sharp with both anger and panic. The internet's cut off. I can't submit my design project to my client, and now they're threatening to cancel the contract. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting her hear the steady rhythm of my breathing. Then I spoke slowly, each word dropping like a hammer. Olivia, do you remember graduation night? You said it clearly. We want to live without you. Well, this is it. This is life without me. Ah. On the other end, she froze for a moment, then gave a mocking laugh, her voice dripping with contempt. Oh, for God's sake, you're blowing this out of proportion. Don't be childish. Just turn the services back on. What's the big deal? I could hear my mother's trembling voice break in from the background. Maya, listen to me. The power company has already sent a shut-off notice, and the water pressure is weak. Please turn them back on, or the whole family will suffer. I sat up straighter, my eyes fixed on the blank wall in front of me. My voice was calm but firm. No, Mom. Not this time, not ever again. Unless Olivia takes responsibility for what she said. She has to apologize and admit she was wrong. If not, I will never go back to being the wallet for this family again. Olivia cut in immediately, her laugh cold. Apologize? For telling the truth? You're just overly sensitive. Everyone can see you make this house miserable. Come on, stop pretending to be noble. All you have to do is press a few buttons and it's fixed. That's it. I could feel the disdain dripping from every word she spoke. I didn't respond further, only sighed and gave one final line. When you're mature enough to take responsibility, you can call me again. For now, good luck. Then I hung up. The phone rang again almost instantly, but I didn't answer. Messages poured in, filled with blame, mixed with half-hearted pleas. I skimmed the first few lines, then didn't bother replying. By the 10th call, I blocked Olivia's number. When the screen went dark, I let out a long breath, as if I had cut through the last binding rope. But it didn't end there. Moments later, my father's number appeared. He rarely called directly, usually leaving things to my mother and Olivia. I hesitated, then answered. Maya, his voice was flat, edged with irritation. What have you done to make this family suffer like this? The power, the water, the internet, everything's a mess. You need to remember you live off this house, so it's your responsibility to keep it running. Heat rushed to my face, my blood pounding. I clenched my teeth and answered, each word deliberate. Dad, I've paid the electricity, the water, the taxes, and the insurance for that house for 3 years. If it weren't for me, the bank would have taken it long ago. Don't say I live off the house, because I'm the one who's kept it alive. I've done far too much, and now it's over. He was silent for a moment, then said bluntly, a daughter should know her place. Family means sacrifice. I let out a bitter laugh, one I barely recognized as my own. If family means sacrifice, then I've already given up my youth, my career, and my dreams. But when has the family ever sacrificed for me? When Olivia called me a burden, what did you do? You sat there, drinking, smiling. So now let Olivia carry the weight instead of me. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, as I sat with Grace and Daniel in their living room, I recounted everything. Daniel nodded, his eyes firm with resolve. They're testing to see if you'll break. You need to stand your ground, Maya. If not, everything will go right back to the way it was. Grace placed a warm cup of tea in front of me, her voice gentle but steady. You've done something I never had the courage to do when I was younger. Cutting that rope, as painful as it is the only way both you and they can learn the lesson you've all avoided. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed relentlessly, but I no longer cared. I knew exactly what was happening inside that house in Boston, and I knew that with every passing hour, they were being forced to face the reality I had always shielded them from. A few scattered texts from old acquaintances came through, along with calls from neighbors, painting a picture of the chaos spreading inside that home. And this time, I was no longer the invisible pillar holding everything up. Olivia was the first to feel the weight of the consequences. She had once boasted to me about pursuing online fashion design contracts, taking on projects from small brands through email and digital platforms. But when the internet was cut, she couldn't send her sketches, couldn't communicate with clients. A major contract she had been waiting on for months was ultimately canceled. I heard from a mutual friend in Boston that Olivia broke down crying right in a cafe where she was borrowing Wi-Fi, desperately trying to submit her work. But it was too late. The company had already signed with someone else. With no income left, Olivia was forced to apply for a job at a nearby supermarket, working night shifts, pushing carts of stock under the harsh glow of neon lights. I pictured her tired face, the pride that once made her hold her head high now crushed under reality, and I felt a flicker of sorrow. But I quickly reminded myself that she had chosen this path herself, with those cruel words she spoke on graduation night. My father didn't fare any better. He had once earned a few $100s a month fixing lawnmowers, drills, and other small tools for neighbors. It wasn't much, but it was steady. Most of it came through texts and calls arranged via Wi-Fi and the internet. Now, with no connection, no one could reach him, and no new jobs came in. He shuffled aimlessly in the dusty garage, sitting among broken machines that no one was bringing over anymore. Silence filled the room that had once been his small source of pride, and I knew within that silence lay both helplessness and simmering anger. And then there was my mother, the same woman who had so often turned away in silence whenever Olivia attacked me. Now she was the one under the heaviest strain. She barely slept, her face growing gaunt in just a week. With no steady electricity, the refrigerator groaned and food spoiled quickly. Each time neighbors stopped by, she tried to avoid them, but the rumors spread through the street all the same. Diane, the neighbor who had sat at my graduation dinner, made no attempt to hide her curiosity, telling everyone that my family was in crisis because I had cut off all support. Robert and Ellen from across the street added their own embellishments during gatherings, turning my family into the subject of constant gossip. I didn't need to be there to picture Olivia keeping her head down on her way to late-night shifts, while my mother struggled beneath the weight of pitying and mocking glances from those around her. One weekend afternoon, I was sitting in Grace and Daniel's kitchen when a sudden pounding rattled the door. Daniel opened it, and I heard my mother's trembling voice. "Is Maya here? I need to see her." I stepped out and saw her standing there, more haggard than I had ever seen. Her eyes were red, her hands clutched her handbag as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The moment she saw me, she nearly broke down. "Please, Maya, come home. Turn the power, the water, the internet back on. The house is falling apart. Olivia can't take it anymore. Your father's lost his work, and I." Her voice cracked, her pleading eyes piercing me so deeply my heart twisted in my chest. I pulled out a chair and invited my mother to sit, but kept my own voice steady. "Mom, for 3 years I've carried everything. Every bill, every tax, every insurance payment. I gave up my dream, gave up my career, just so everyone could live in peace. And what did I get in return? A thank you? A little respect? Number. All I ever heard was that I was a burden." I looked straight into her eyes, refusing to turn away. Now it's Olivia's turn to face the consequences. I will not carry it anymore. My mother broke into tears, her shoulders trembling, but she didn't argue. Perhaps she knew the truth in my words. Grace sat beside me, resting her hand on my shoulder, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, his gaze firm, as if to make clear to my mother that this pleading, however desperate, would change nothing. At last, my mother wiped her tears, rose from the chair, and left in silence without another word. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled, my chest still heavy yet strangely light at the same time. I no longer felt weak. I had finally spoken the words that had always caught in my throat. I was no longer their wallet. And for the first time in years, I believed I could hold that boundary, no matter the tears or the begging. Time passed faster than I expected. 3 months after I cut off all support, the red brick house where I grew up, the place once filled with memories, no longer belonged to my family. The news came to me through a photo sent by Diane, the neighbor who never missed a chance to gossip. In the picture, a large red sign stood planted in the front yard. Bank foreclosure, house for sale. The lawn was overgrown, the mailbox stuffed with unopened letters, the paint on the door peeling. Seeing that image made me feel both sorrow and a strange sense of release. That house had once been the cage that kept me trapped in the role of caretaker. Now, it had fallen exactly the way I had predicted the night I walked away into the cold Boston air. My parents and Olivia were forced to move out, renting a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard it was just a cramped one-bedroom unit in an ordinary neighborhood, far from the neighbors who had once admired them. Olivia slept on a fold-out sofa, while my parents squeezed into the single room. My father no longer repaired machines without internet. No one knew where to find him. Olivia kept working night shifts at the supermarket, her face gaunt, the pride she once carried as a college graduate completely gone. My mother lived in constant worry, no longer able to maintain the image of a perfect family in front of others. From the comfort of their once sturdy home, they had become the subject of whispers over morning coffee among their former neighbors. Meanwhile, I chose a completely different path. With the little savings I had left, plus a small bank loan, I bought a modest apartment in Manhattan. It wasn't large, just one bedroom, a small living room, and an open kitchen, but to me, it was an entire world. I cleaned every corner myself, hung paintings of flowers and leaves I recreated from memories of my old cafe, and placed a few green plants by the window so that each morning, when sunlight streamed in, I felt as if I were being reborn. I began signing up to teach small classes on cafe design and independent shop management at a local community center. At first, there were only a handful of students, most of them young people dreaming of opening their own coffee shops. But slowly, the classes grew. Word spread about Miss Maya Carter, the one who once ran Leaf and Latte. Every time I stood at the board, chalk in hand, sketching out shop operation diagrams, I felt a quiet joy, subtle, yet full of life. I was passing on what I had once built, turning my losses into lessons so others could start from firmer ground. The money I earned wasn't much, but for the first time in years, it was mine. No more utility bills arriving from Boston, no more insurance fees, no more property taxes on that old house. Every dollar I made went toward rent for my apartment, books, coffee beans to test new recipes, and sometimes a good meal at a Manhattan corner restaurant. I found freedom in each small expense because they served my life, not to fill the endless holes dug by others. On late nights, I sat by the window watching the city lights glitter, and a faint sadness would drift through me. I thought of my parents, I thought of Olivia. I no longer hated them, but I couldn't forget their silence at the graduation dinner when Olivia called me a burden. That wound had reshaped me, turning me into someone stronger, more resolute. I understood now that family, without respect, is nothing more than a chain. And I had broken it. Sometimes, in dreams, I still found myself walking into the old house, hearing my mother's voice from the kitchen, Olivia's giggles, and the clatter of my father tinkering in the garage. But when I woke, I was in my small Manhattan apartment, morning light streaming through the window, and I knew I had chosen the right path. I no longer wanted to go back. Everything I had once carried had already collapsed with that house. Now, I was living a new life, my own life. One early autumn morning, just as I returned from teaching at the community center, the postman knocked on my door and handed me a cream-colored envelope. In the corner was handwriting so familiar it made my heart stop. Olivia. I stood frozen for a long while, holding the envelope without opening it, as if just seeing her name was enough to bring every painful memory rushing back. I set it on the table, brewed myself a cup of coffee, and sat staring at it lying still on the wood. I wrestled with myself. Should I open it or throw it straight in the trash? In the end, curiosity won. I carefully slit the envelope open and unfolded the neatly folded page inside. Maya, I'm sorry. The opening line was short, but I read it over and over again. Olivia went on to write that she had been selfish, that she had failed to see what I had done for the family. She told me about the exhaustion of working night shifts at the supermarket, about losing that big contract and the opportunities that slipped away. I understand now, the shaky letters spelled out. I know you carried too much. I wish I had stayed silent that night. I hope for a chance to mend things, to bring our family back to the way it was. I set the letter down, staring at the words as if I could pull out some hidden meaning behind them. I searched for a promise, a concrete plan, or at least a sign that Olivia had truly changed, but there was nothing. It was all hollow apologies and a desperate cry for help. Not a single word about responsibility, no mention of standing on her own 2 feet. She didn't say she would share the burden, didn't acknowledge the insult at the graduation dinner, didn't admit that she and my parents had all enabled the silence. It ended only with, "I hope to be forgiven." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, where I kept old photos of the 2 of us as children. My eyes welled with tears, but I wiped them away quickly. I understood that if I responded, if I cracked open even the smallest door for Olivia, I would be pulled back into the same cycle. She would lean on me again, my parents would grow accustomed to me carrying it all again, and months or years later, I'd find myself once more in the role of the invisible wallet. I couldn't go back. I had come too far, and I had begun to learn how to love myself. The next day, I carried the letter out to the balcony, sat under the gentle Manhattan sun, and read it once more before carefully putting it away. I didn't tear it, and I didn't burn it, because I wanted to keep it as proof, not proof of remorse, but proof of my own resolve. Whenever I felt myself softening, I could take it out and remind myself that apologies without action are nothing more than another weight to carry. That evening, when I told Grace and Daniel about the letter, Grace looked at me with concern. "Are you going to reply?" I shook my head firmly. "Number. If I respond, I'll fall back into the same trap. I've sacrificed too much already, and I've learned that love without fairness only turns into chains." Daniel nodded, his eyes carrying a deep agreement. "You're right, Maya. Forgiveness may be necessary, but forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the place that hurt you." In the quiet of the night, I sat by the window, gazing down at the glowing streets, my heart strangely at ease. I didn't feel hatred toward Olivia anymore, nor anger. What I felt was a necessary distance. I hoped that one day she would truly learn to grow up, but I knew that was no longer my responsibility. Family cannot be built on one-sided dependence. Family only has meaning when it comes with fairness and respect. Without those, it is nothing but a burden, and I was too exhausted to carry it any longer. As the night breeze slipped through the window, I closed my eyes and told myself that this silence was my final step out of the shadows of the past. I didn't need another apology. What I needed was the peace I had fought to reclaim, and I would protect it with every ounce of resolve I had. In the months after Olivia's letter, I realized a truth clearer than ever. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by respect and fairness. I had given everything I had, my dreams, my career, every dollar I saved, only to be met with silence and disregard. If I had continued, I would have remained forever a shadow in that house, an invisible wallet no one truly valued. So I chose to cut ties, not out of hatred, but to find myself again, to reclaim my worth and my right to live an ordinary life free from crushing burdens. One morning, I stood in the small kitchen of my Manhattan apartment, sunlight filtering through the glass window, casting golden light across the wooden table. I slowly brewed a cup of coffee, letting the aroma fill the room. No more phones ringing with overdue bills, no more cruel words, no more cold stares. Just me, a hot cup of coffee, and a peaceful morning I never thought I would have. I breathed deeply and smiled. After so many years, I finally felt I truly belonged here. To you, the one listening to my story, setting boundaries is not selfish. It is the only way we can be seen and be loved in the right way. Love without fairness turns into chains. And sometimes, letting go does not mean losing family, but finding yourself again. What about you? Have you ever been called a burden in your own family?